Hi, everyone. Welcome to the monthly lecture series for the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. My name is Angie Grove. I'm the executive director. It is 2 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. But I am also managing the waiting room and the chat box, so I'm going to be letting people in as I do this as well. Okay. I'm actually going to have to stop sharing my screen real quick. My apologies. I will put that image back up in a minute, but I need to access the biography of our speaker so I can introduce him to you. Then I will share the screen again. Okay. So again, welcome to everyone who's just joining to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum's free monthly lecture series. It is our first lecture of the new year, so happy 2026, everyone. If you didn't already know, the year 2026 is the 250th anniversary of the American Revolutionary War, of the Declaration of Independence, of the birth of the United States. The whole country, all across the country, is commemorating this semi-quincentennial year. It's the biggest year since the bicentennial in 1975. So we're very excited this year to have all of our lectures in 2026 focus on Revolutionary War topics. Later on in the season, our lectures will actually mirror our new exhibit, Voices of the Revolution, and we'll be featuring speakers who will be showcasing new research that was conducted for that exhibit, and you can learn more about some of the untold stories of Vermonters during the Revolution. Okay. So I am happy to introduce our first speaker today, Mr. Jack Kelly, who will be presenting Thomas Paine at War, The Times That Tried Men's Souls. Jack Kelly is an award-winning biographer. He's an author and a historian, and his most recent book is Tom Paine's War. Other works you may know him from include Band of Giants, which received the Daughters of the American Revolution History Medal, and God Save Benedict Arnold, which is a book that is a top seller in our gift shop at the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum, in fact. God Save Benedict Arnold was also a finalist for the New England Book Awards. Jack Kelly has also published 5 novels and is a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow in Nonfiction Literature. And he currently lives in New York's Hudson Valley, though we won't hold that against him, even though he's not a Green Mountaineer. That's okay. Even Ethan Allen married a Yorker eventually, so I think we can settle that debate. Okay, so I do want to give a quick overview before I hand it over to Jack of some logistics. I will be handling the chat box. I do ask everyone remains muted. You can also turn your camera off or keep it on. That is at your comfort level, though I will be spotlighting Jack's camera so that everyone can see his face while he's giving the presentation. At the end of Jack's presentation, which is about 40 minutes long, there will be a Q&A, and I will be helping facilitate that Q&A. So you can put questions into the chat box as Jack presents, but we will be holding all questions to answer to the very end. Okay. I also want to give a quick thank you to our sponsors for the Homestead Community Outreach Programs, Richard and Linda Smarg. Their generous donations help us keep our programs up and running. And after I hand over to Jack, I will be putting a link into the chat box for anybody who might wish to donate to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum to also help support programs like this. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. We do not receive any standing grant money or government funds for anything, so your donations are what keeps us going. We are currently 92% of the way to our winter fundraising goal, so anything you can give today would definitely help us reach that goal. Thank you so much. Okay, so without further ado, we're going to hear from Jack Kelly about Tom Paine, who you may know as the author of Common Sense. But you may not know Tom Paine also fought in the Revolutionary War. And probably the least known fact about him is he wrote a deist tract, which made him highly unpopular, which actually puts him right in the same camp as our very own Ethan Allen. So, Jack, maybe we'll get to learn a little bit more about all of those things today. So, thank you very much. And I will go ahead and share the presentation. Please, everyone, welcome Jack.
Thank you very much, Angie. I want to thank all the folks who helped organize this event. Thank you all for tuning in today. And I really do love Ethan Allen. His ironworks was quite close to my home on the east side of the Hudson River. He was in Western Connecticut, and that's where he started out with his ironworks, and there's still remnants of that over there. So I've always admired him for his audacity, let's say. When I was thinking about the 250th anniversary, I asked myself three questions. The first was, which of the founders was the most influential in that crucial year of 1776? And the second was, which of the founders is most relevant today? And the third question was, which of the founders would you most want to have a beer with? And the answer to all three questions to me was Thomas Paine. I also wanted to get at both sides of the revolution. On the one hand, the ideas and values that were so world-shaking at that time, and on the other hand, the great struggle and sacrifice that was required to make those ideas a reality. And Thomas Paine was involved in both aspects of the revolution. He was articulated the ideas of equality and natural rights probably more clearly and more boldly than anyone. And he demonstrated his commitment to the cause by volunteering for the Pennsylvania militia at a time when the existence of the country was really on the line. So who was Thomas Paine? We could probably switch now, next slide. And there's a famous portrait of him. The first thing to know about him was that he was an immigrant. He was born in England, in a small town northeast of London. His family was working class. His father was a corset maker. His parents really had to scrimp just to give him an elementary school education. And for the rest of it, he had to educate himself, which he did throughout his life. But when he was 12 years old, he went to work as an apprentice to his father, learned the corset making trade, working 14-hour days. So he really knew what work was about. And he had other jobs while he was in England. He was a school teacher for a while. He eventually got a job as a tax collector. And basically, he was scraping by on the lowest rung of the British middle class. He was not an intellectual. He was not a rich man. And he was certainly not a slave owner. And one of the pastimes that he enjoyed while he was in England, now on the next slide, was to participate in tavern debates. And guys would get together at the pub, and they would, over pints of ale, they would talk over the issues of the day, and they gave a prize for whoever had the sharpest arguments. And Paine often won that prize because he was quick-witted. He knew how to skewer his opponents, and in particular, he had a way of explaining his arguments so that they were clear to anybody. He didn't talk over people's heads. And that was a skill that would come in handy for him later on in life. And of course, he liked to drink. So Thomas Paine loved the ideas of the Enlightenment. He agreed with the notion of natural rights that were part of being a human being and not bestowed by some government or authority. He loved science. He took courses in astronomy, and he became friendly with Benjamin Franklin on the next slide, who had been living in London for quite a number of years at that point. And of course, Franklin was also from a working class background and was one of the major scientists of the day. And he and Paine became close friends. And it's thought now that they collaborated on quite a bit of writing of different articles and uh, uh, statements while Paine was still in England uh, that were unknown until now. That there's a new edition of the works of Thomas Paine coming out this year that will include a lot more material that he actually collaborated with Benjamin Franklin on. Um, but what, in 1774, Paine was 37 years old, and he really found himself at loose ends. He had been fired from his job. He had uh, separated from his wife. And so he decided to try his luck in America. And he got a recommendation from Franklin, uh, got on a boat, came across to America, and settled in Philadelphia. And he, then we could go to the next slide, uh, got a job as a magazine editor. And he loved Philadelphia. He uh, loved the coffee houses and the taverns and the real ferment of ideas that was going on at that time. Um, and he arrived in America late in 1774. Less than 6 months later, the Revolutionary War broke out. On the next slide, with the violence at Lexington and Concord. And Paine would later write, he said, when the country into which I had set my foot was set on fire about my ears, it was time to stir. It was time for every man to stir. And he embraced the patriot cause with a great passion. And some of his friends, knowing his facility for writing, including Franklin, who was now back in America, uh, urged him to write a pamphlet that would explain the conflict between Britain and the colonies from an Englishman's point of view. And Paine thought that was a good idea. He started working on it. And these pamphlets, they've been compared to social media posts. Now, I'm not sure how accurate a comparison that is, but they were cheap. They were meant to be copied and spread around and talked about. One of his friends, Benjamin Rush, who was a doctor and a politician in Philadelphia, encouraged him to write the pamphlet, but he said, "Don't go too far. Don't mention the word independence." And the reason was that in the fall of 1775, even though the Revolutionary War was continuing to sputter along, most Americans did not believe in a complete break from uh, Great Britain. They felt really they'd grown up under a king. Their parents had lived under kings, and they really thought that they were fighting for reconciliation with the British Crown under better terms. Basically, they were hoping to make a deal with the king. And one of the remarkable things about the pamphlet that Paine produced, in addition to its content, which was quite extraordinary, was the style in which it was written. And there were many of these pamphlets being produced at the time. Almost all of them were written by intellectuals aimed at other intellectuals. They were often written by lawyers or clergymen. And they used a very high style of language. They included a lot of quotes from the classics. Thomas Paine wrote in a very down to earth style, very blunt style. that could be understood by a farmer or by a laborer. And basically, he was um, writing in common language for common people. And as we see on the next slide, um, he called the pamphlet Common Sense. And he began with some pretty basic arguments for independence. He said, for example, that the British claimed to be protecting the colonies when in fact they were drawing the colonies into their own wars with their European enemies. He said it didn't really make sense that an island would forever uh, rule over an entire continent. And he said, with the war on, there really was no going back. Um, he said, the blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, 'tis time to part. And then he went further. And what he had to say next was really made this one of the consequential documents in world history, because he said, in effect, the king is a fraud. The king has no divine right to rule you. All kings rule through force of arms and not through any right that they have. Hereditary aristocracy is an insult. The division of people into subjects and kings is an absurdity. And he said, the king is a worm who, in the midst of his splendor, is crumbling into dust. And this was language that Americans had not heard before, and their jaws dropped open. And then Paine went further still, and he said, this uprising is not just about breaking with the King of England. He said, we have it in our power to begin the world over again. And he imagined that Americans would change the system of monarchies that had existed for centuries around the world and substitute a new form of government that would be a government of and by the people. This was the great cause that he envisioned for the American Revolution. And it made sense because if you're going to ask patriots to risk their lives in a war, it had to be for something big and to begin the world over again. If the pamphlets were social media posts, Common Sense was the first viral post. It sold enormously well, tens of thousands of copies. It was reprinted in newspapers. It was passed around. It was read out loud in public houses and in town squares. And it was discussed by everybody and talked about by everybody and spread over to even in Europe and England and all the way out to Moscow. People were reading this remarkable new pamphlet. Um, a man from Connecticut wrote that he wrote to Thomas Paine. He said, "You have declared the sentiments of millions, and we were blind, but on reading your enlightening words, the scales have fallen from our eyes." And what they saw was that this was more than taxation or the price of tea. Thomas Paine had turned a rebellion into a true revolution, and the effect of common sense was to begin to very rapidly push the public opinion towards independence and away from the idea of reconciliation. And in the concluding remark, the end of Common Sense, Paine said that nothing could settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration of independence. Now, he wrote those words in January of 1776, and less than 6 months later, the Continental Congress declared that the colonies were absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and the whole world changed. Now we go to the next slide. Whoops, I missed a slide. This is, of course, the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson and Franklin and um, Congress agreeing to independence. But on the next slide, we see that the king didn't want the world to change. He sent the largest expeditionary force um, in British history across the Atlantic to punish anyone who would not bend the knee to his authority and majesty. 10,000 armed men to Canada, nearly 40,000 to New York City, and the whole nature of the Revolutionary War became much more serious. And on the next slide, we see that Thomas Paine wanted to act as a citizen of a republic would act. He gave over all the profits from common sense to buy supplies for the army. And then he, even though he was now a celebrity author and really known up and down the colonies and in Europe and in England, he agreed to volunteer with the Pennsylvania militia and march as a private in Washington's army. And the unit that he joined was called the Associators, was derived from an idea that Benjamin Franklin had actually had many years earlier of how to get the Quakers of Pennsylvania to join the militia and help protect the colony, being Quakers and pacifists. So he came up with this idea of the Associators that would be a voluntary, purely voluntary military organization. It was democratic. They elected their own officers, and they had short enlistments. And the men who Paine joined in that unit were very much like himself. They were called leather apron men. They were men who worked the trades. So they might be a blacksmith or a teamster or shoemaker. And so he got along very well with them, and they marched down to Perth Amboy in New Jersey, and were stationed there. And across the short body of water, they could see the buildup of the British forces on Staten Island. And all that summer, Royal Navy ships kept coming, unloading redcoats, unloading Hessian mercenaries, supplies, cannon, and ammunition, getting ready for the campaign, which began in August. And this was a real drumbeat of disaster for the Patriots. The first battle was the Battle of Brooklyn, which would turn out to be the largest battle of the entire war. Complete defeat for the Patriots. In September, the British attacked and captured New York City, another defeat for the Patriots. In October, they were fighting up in White Plains, another defeat for the Patriots. In November, the British attacked Fort Washington and captured it, another defeat for the Patriots. And this was the worst yet because the British captured nearly 3,000 men there out of an army that had only started out only with 20,000 men. And as it turned out, almost to a man, those soldiers were murdered in captivity by the British. Thomas Paine, by that time, had switched over from the Associators to the Continental Army, and he was serving as an aide to Nathaniel Greene, who was one of the top generals under Washington, at Fort Lee. So he was able to watch from across the Hudson River the fall of Fort Washington, and a few days later, Fort Lee itself fell to the British. And Paine and the other soldiers had to scramble to get out and not be captured themselves. They lost a huge cache of supplies there. And one of the British officers who marched into Fort Lee said, the rebels ran like scared rabbits, and they left behind some of that scoundrel common sense man's letters, which we can read at our leisure. So even among the British soldiers, Paine had this notoriety and reputation and the nickname of common sense. And then began the Great Retreat across New Jersey on the next slide. And they uh, Washington's entire army now marched with Paine with them, uh, and it poured rain. They roads turned to mud. It got bitter cold. This is all through November and December of 1776. Um, Many of the men were marching barefoot. They had very little in the way of shelter because they'd lost most of their tents. And every day the army shrank from illness, from enlistments running out, and from men simply giving up and going home and deserting. They got all the way down to Trenton, New Jersey. Washington felt that he couldn't make a stand there, so he crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. And this was really the low point um, of the campaign, the low point of the year, and you might even say the low point of American history. The 20,000 man army that Washington had started with had shrunk down to, at times, 3,000 men. And he wrote to his brother at that time and said, I think the game is pretty near up. And the British thought that the war was over. They had won. They had defeated the Patriots at every turn. This ragtag group that was left over would easily be dealt with. And so General Howe, who was the commander, decided to go into winter quarters. He stationed Hessian regiments in the various towns around New Jersey. And then he and his officers went back to New York City to enjoy themselves. And then a miracle happened. And Thomas Paine played a significant role in that miracle. All during the campaign, he'd been talking to the men who he knew quite well, having marched with them as an enlisted man himself. He'd been talking with the officers who he got to know at headquarters and would dine with. And so he had a really comprehensive view of the situation in the army, and he knew that one of the huge problems was that morale was sinking to a very low level. So he got the idea to write another pamphlet. He'd been taking notes all during the campaign, coming up with ideas, and now he went back to Philadelphia and he wrote a pamphlet um, that he called The American Crisis, which we see on the next slide. And the he published this on the 19th of December in 1776. It begins with what are probably his most famous line, "These are the times that try men's souls." And he went on to assure the Patriots that they could prevail. And he tried to shame the loyalists, who he called the summer soldiers and the sunshine patriots, the people who'd given up on the cause, the people who were cooperating with the British. He tried to tamp down the fear that was going through the Patriots as they saw their fortunes sink. He channeled the anger of men who knew that British soldiers and Hessian soldiers were raping American women and girls, who knew that Patriot homes were being invaded and looted and destroyed. And he assured people, or he warned the Patriots that it was going to be hard, but he said, the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Um, um, and his words really mattered. The morale in the army did begin to rise. More militiamen did begin to turn out. Uh, and the American Crisis was another bestseller. It was read by everyone. It was passed around. It was circulated through the army, and probably the most important audience for it was George Washington himself. because Washington at that time was making a very momentous decision, very risky decision, no matter which way he went. And we really don't know what went through his mind or what all factors he considered. But 6 days after the publication of the American Crisis, George Washington took his entire army um, across the river, as we see on the next slide, and on Christmas night, crossed over back into New Jersey um, in the dark, in a snowstorm. And then the army marched 10 miles through this darkness, dragging cannon, uh, many of the men still barefoot, in what became a raging blizzard, clutching a musket, some of the men just dressed in rags. They arrived just after dawn at Trenton, and they fought a professional mercenary army, and they won. They could hardly believe it themselves. Finally, after all those defeats, they won, and they took 900 Hessians prisoner. And the crossing of the Delaware is probably the most iconic event of the entire Revolution. But what came next was also important, because Washington, when they took the prisoners back to Pennsylvania, wanted more. He did not want to end the campaign with yet another retreat. So he made the very gutsy decision to cross again over the Delaware River, back into New Jersey again. And this time it would be an even riskier proposition, because he would be facing both the British and the Hessian armies. And this time he would have the Delaware River at his back, so there would be no more retreating. And he knew that nearly 90% of his soldiers had enlistments that ran out on January 1st. And they were crossing the river on December 30th and December 31st. So Washington had to beg his men to stay, to just enlist for just a little while longer. And he said, "My brave fellows, you have done all that I asked and more, but we know not how to spare you." And not all of the soldiers did reenlist, but many did, and enough did. And so, with the words of Thomas Paine ringing in their ears, they crossed the and took up a position in Trenton, as we see in the next slide. And the Americans dug in along what was called Assunpink Creek, which runs, I don't know if I can, oh yeah, runs along the south side of Trenton into the Delaware River. The British lined up on the north side of the Assunpink Creek, and there was only one bridge that crossed over. And the second battle of Trenton climaxed when the British decided to cross that bridge, break through the American line, break the American spirit, and finally end this rebellion once and for all. And they surged across, and they almost made it to the other side. But the firepower and the willpower of the Americans stopped them. They fell back, they regrouped, they tried again. Again, the Patriots stopped them. They tried a third time, and again they were stopped. And each time, a great shout went up from all the Americans. And the witness who reported that said they shouted as one man. But he was mystified as how that could be because the American line was more than a mile long. It was getting dark. You couldn't see from one end to the other. So how was it that they could all shout in unison? And one of the soldiers said that General Washington, as we see on the next slide, um, General Washington rode up and ordered the army to cheer. And as I write in Tom Paine's War, maybe that was it. Maybe that man who so often kept his own counsel, whose heart had been broken by the losses and defeats of the previous autumn, who had endured that long retreat across New Jersey, maybe that man, for one moment, needed to exalt. Maybe he led the shout himself. And maybe to some minds, it was a shout to awaken history, to remind generations unborn that of the danger these men had faced and the hardships that they had endured. And maybe it was a cry, as Thomas Paine wrote, to the future, to the future world, that in the depth of winter, when nothing but hope and virtue could survive, the city and the country, alarmed at one common danger, came forth to meet and repulse it. That night, the after fighting the British Army to a standstill, the Patriots slipped away, marched through the darkness at night, arrived in Princeton the next morning, fought the British rear guard, defeated them, and then escaped to secure winter quarters uh, in Morristown, New Jersey. And the whole tone and direction of the Revolutionary War changed from that day. And I want to conclude by talking very briefly about the relevance of Thomas Paine to our own time. Um, I think a lot of people feel that we're passing through some fraught times in our history, and some have questioned how durable our democracy really is. Thomas Paine, in his day, was reviled. He was very enthusiastic supporter of the French Revolution, which went off the rails, and he wrote a sort of an Enlightenment critique of organized religion and Christianity in particular, that made him largely an outcast. Ministers in New England burned his books, and his works have been banned a number of times over the last 250 years. So is he still relevant? Is he, as I say, the founder for our time? And I think he is, because he was writing for people who were facing a true crisis. And I think that some of what he had to say to them would apply to us. And I'm just going to mention 3 points from his writing. Um, the first thing was, in the American crisis, he said, don't panic. He said, panic is understandable. You can expect it, but it does no good to act out of desperation. He said, I fear not. I see no real cause for fear. And I love the man who can smile in trouble and gather strength from distress. So that's the first thing, is to stay calm and resolute. Uh, Secondly, I mentioned that, and we could switch to the next slide, this almost the last one. I mentioned that common the in American Crisis, the words "these are the times that try men's souls" are the most well-known quote from Thomas Paine. But lately, I've been hearing more often a quote from Common Sense, in which he said, in America, the law is king. For as in absolute governments, the king is law, so in free countries, the law ought to be king and there ought to be no other. And I think that emphasis from the very moment of the birth of America, of the rule of law, and that the law is what's written down in the law books, and it's not from a king or a man, it's the actual law. That is vitally important and is really a foundation for democracy. And the third thing, in the American crisis, Thomas Paine talked about hope. And one of the really outstanding characteristics of Paine was he was always an optimist. He was not naive, but he really believed that Americans could change the world. They could begin the world over again. And Nelson Mandela said, hope is a powerful weapon. And I think that Thomas Paine would have agreed with that. And he would have said to uh, those who feel that there is no hope, he would probably say, look around you, look at local governments, at voluntary associations, at neighbors helping neighbors, at activists standing up for traditional rights. Every day, every year, every election is a new beginning, and hope really is a powerful weapon. Paine told a story in the American crisis about when they were on their retreat across New Jersey. He encountered a loyalist, and the loyalist had his young child with him. And he looked at Thomas Paine and he said, what I want is peace in my day. And Paine was appalled. And he wrote in the American crisis, what a generous parent should have said was, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day that my child may have peace. And I think that's another message from Paine that we really should keep in mind, that democracy is always looking towards the future. And it's not just about us, it's about the next generation and the next generation, because they have rights and we have an obligation to protect their rights. So I think that if we um, turn away from fear, demand the rule of law, and keep a tight grip on hope, that perhaps, as Thomas Paine wrote, by perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious issue. Thank you very much. I'd be happy to take questions or put them in the chat.
Thank you very much, Jack. Okay, so I'm going to help facilitate the Q&A session. So if I'm going to actually go ahead and remove the spotlight from Jack. Okay, so now I have the Zoom in my gallery view, so I can see those of you who have your screens on. If you wanted to turn your screen on to raise your hand on the camera, you may do so. You may use the hand raising feature in Zoom, or if you want to go ahead and type a question, you can put it into the chat box and I will try to help facilitate them. First up, Jack, I want to personally say thank you and let you know that a number of people have been using the applause feature in Zoom. So there's been a lot of applause that have come up on the screen. There's another one right there. Thank you. And Colleen Montgomery put in the chat, thank you for those inspiring words. I think especially right at the end there. There's a lot of great quotes about how hope is the most powerful weapon. So we appreciate hearing that. Robert also says, thank you, Mr. Kelly, for reminding us about the origins of our democracy. Okay, So, Jack, there is a question in the chat box, so we'll start with that. It's from a Mr. John Devono, who is actually a board member here at Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. So he knows a lot about this time period of history. His question is, Jack, are you familiar with Edward Gray's book, Tom Paine's Iron Bridge? And if so, can you speak a little bit to that?
Well, yeah, first I want to thank John because he really made the initial contact with me actually about another book that I wrote and helped organize this. So I appreciate it, John, for uh, uh, getting that invitation out to me. I've come across that title, but I'm not familiar with the book. So all I can say is that after the Revolutionary War was over, Thomas Paine had worked really for the cause in one role or another throughout the war. He wanted to return to his or pursue his interest in invention and science and tinkering. And he came up with the idea of an iron bridge that he said he had based on a spider's web to get the structure of it. And he drew up plans for it. It was quite ironwork was still fairly primitive at the time, so it was hard. It was going to be quite expensive even to make a model of it. And he went over to Europe to try to raise money to this dream of an iron bridge, which would be uh, he thought very superior to wooden bridges because it would have much longer span and would not interfere as much with navigation on rivers. And he was not able to ever really get I think there was one version of it that was put across the creek somewhere in Pennsylvania, I believe, but I'm not sure about that. Uh, and while he was in Europe, the French Revolution broke out, and that then it consumed him, and he became a great advocate for the French Revolution. So uh, that's all I know really about his bridge activities.
Thank you, Jack. So, like a lot of Enlightenment thinkers, it sounds like he was kind of a jack of all trades.
Yeah, and he got that, I think, also from Benjamin Franklin. His friendship with Franklin. Franklin was also somewhat of a inventor and man of science.
Okay, there's another question in the chat. This one is from Elise Guyette, who's a local historian here in Vermont. She's asked, can you talk about Thomas Paine's life after the Revolution, his eventual death, for example, where is he buried?
Yeah, as I mentioned, he after the revolution was over, he uh, um, pretty much abandoned politics for the time being, tried to get the bridge together. Uh, when the French Revolution broke out, he was elated. He thought that that idea that we can change the world was now coming true. We were seeing the fruits of the American Revolution in France, and that would just be the beginning of this world-changing event. So he defended the French Revolution very strongly against criticism from particularly from people in England, and he was made an honorary French citizen. They loved him. He wrote a book called Rights of Man that was really a kind of a Bible for the French Revolution in its early days. But he found himself in the unusual position of being a moderate when he was in France, whereas in America he'd been a radical. Over there, he didn't want to execute the king. He didn't believe in capital punishment, and he thought that they were going way too far. And he eventually got thrown in a dungeon and almost got his head cut off. Uh, Eventually was released and stayed in France for quite a while. I think about another 10 years. And then came in 1802, he came back to America. He lived in New Rochelle. He'd been given a farm there by New York State for his contribution to the Revolution. And he died there and was buried on that farm in 18, it was 1809. then one of his early biographers and some Englishmen came over and decided he should really be buried in England, dug up his bones, and on the way over, taking him over to Europe, they got lost. And so in a sort of appropriate fashion, nobody knows where he's buried, so or whatever happened to him. So uh, that was his later life. He got very much involved in the politics of the 1790s. He was an ally of Thomas Jefferson, and it was quite a bitter political time. And he had falling outs with, and of course, he also wrote about religion or deism, defending his own faith in deism. Uh, and that was another huge blow to his reputation as American Puritan religious people just could not swallow that.
Jack, thanks for bringing that up about his deism. Because one of the questions in the chat box from Marguerite is, did Paine influence or associate with Ethan Allen? And I was wondering the same question, particularly with their deism tracts, because though we now know some people like Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin may have been deists, they were perhaps smart enough or to not proselytize it, whereas Thomas Paine, Ethan Allen were some of the few people publicly advocating for deism. And can you speak a little bit more about if you think they conversed at all?
Yeah, of course, deism was what was seen as a rational approach to religion, or to the supernatural. That deists believed that there was a creator, there was a God, but that he created the world and then stepped back from it. He didn't interfere in history, and that the revelation of God was in his works, in nature, in the whole of reality, really, and was not just found in a book. And very radical at the time. Ethan Allen was considered quite a crazy man for adopting that. Benjamin Franklin, somebody else had asked him about religion, and Franklin was also a deist. And he said, if you spit into the wind, you spit into your own face. And that was his advice for anybody who wanted to criticize religion. He says, just not, it's never going to go over, and it's just going to come back and at you. And as you said, and very accurately, Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison, all these guys, they were deists. Deism was kind of trendy at the time, but they didn't talk about it publicly because they knew that, that what it would. And Franklin, I mean, Thomas Paine just couldn't keep, he wanted to get it out there. And ironically, one of the reasons he wrote the whole book, The Age of Reason, where he explained all his beliefs in deism, was that he thought that the French Revolution was sliding toward atheism. And he was not an atheist, and he thought that was a bad thing, and that he could give them this rational religion to prevent the French from going completely they even got rid of the 7-day week because it was too biblical for them. They put in a 10-day week. So that type of thing, that was the his contribution to and unfortunately it gave him an undeserved reputation as an atheist and as an infidel, and really sunk him even down to today. I think has really hurt his reputation.
Thank you, Jack. There's a military history question to go a little bit further than I think your talk presented on. Did Thomas Paine continue to serve in the colonial army during the Southern campaigns?
No, after 1776, he was briefly went back and helped out Nathaniel Greene in 1777 when they fought at Germantown. But basically, he left the military altogether and never really participated again. So he was like a cheerleader for the revolution more than a fighter.
Thank you. Okay, so I have one more question that's in the chat box, but this is also the last call to anyone in the present who's in the present watching the presentation. If you'd like to submit a question, please put it in the chat box now. And if we don't have time to answer all questions, then I maybe be able to send them to Jack, and maybe he'll be able to email me some answers that we can maybe share when we get the recording out, or when I send the recording via email to everyone. Okay, so Jack, the question that's in the chat box right now is from Kit Andrews. It's a little bit of a long one. I'm gonna summarize it a little bit. But basically the question is about how some would say that we've never had a true full democracy in the United States. It hasn't represented all people. For example, they mentioned people of color and Black people, people with low incomes, etc. And that some have argued that this is because of a corporate controlled system. Kit asks, what do you think? I'm also going to add on to that, or rephrase it a little bit. What do you think Thomas Paine would think about this?
Yeah, I think that is certainly true. It's been a long struggle to get inclusive democracy. Uh, I think Thomas Paine was very far ahead of his time as far as broadening the voting rights. He was for women's rights. I don't know if he actually came out for giving women the right to vote, which wasn't an issue really at the time, but except among women, I guess you would say. But he wanted a broader and particularly to get rid of the property qualification for voting, and to broaden the franchise for voting, and to make democracy really participatory. He didn't want a Senate that would be sort of a check on the will of the people. Uh, those ideas were debated, of course, during the Constitutional Convention, and they came up with something slightly different. But he was certainly pushing for democracy at that time. I think it's uh, the corporate thing is just a continuation of the dominance of people that have wealth. That was, we saw in the Gilded Age and all through American history that the people that have wealth and influence tend to want to dominate, and it's something we always have to be fighting against, and turning back, and trying to get down to what people really want and need, and not what uh, their betters, so to speak, would give them. So that was Thomas Paine's, and he was always popular among labor movements and among just people that were for a more basic democracy throughout our history. And Thomas Edison was a great fan of his. Walt Whitman, labor leader Eugene Debs was a fan of Paine. So yeah, that's been his position. I think as with many things, he was ahead of his time.
Thank you, Jack. I really appreciate the questions from everyone and the comments, Jack, that you've made. I think it's especially fitting for this year as the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, the America's semi-quincentennial. I am a historian, but I'm a strong believer that the semi-quincentennial is to commemorate America today, and for us to think about the triumphs, the struggles, and to focus on not just history and not just what happened in the Revolutionary War, but what does this mean to us today as citizens. Um, so I appreciate your presentation and everyone's questions. Thank you again, everyone, for attending. I have put in the chat box one more time the link to donate to the Ethan Allen Homestead Museum. We are a 501c3 nonprofit, and your support would really mean a lot to us. If everyone on this video was able to click that link now and donate $10, that would go a long way to helping us out. We really appreciate it. And Jack, thank you so much. And if everyone here can throw a thank you to him in the chat box, or you can do the
Yeah.
sign language applause, you
If
can
I
do the applause emojis. We really
if I
appreciate
could
it,
just
Jack.
if I could just add one more thing, and I agree with you 100% about history versus what it really means today in America. Um, I have which I forgot to mention, but I have a website. You can find out more about my books at jackkellybooks.com, and maybe we could put up a link on your website to. I also have a Substack newsletter that helps me keep my mailing list going, and I also send out a weekly short history essay. So if people are interested in that, they can just look up my name and on Substack, and they'll take it right there.
And Jack,
So
can
thank
people
you.
access that through the jackkellybooks.com website?
It's also there's a link right on my website as well. So, and
Fabulous.
I have a
Okay.
contact page on my website. So if you want to get in touch with me, that's a good place to go.
Okay. I quickly typed it into the chat. It's not showing up as a live link, but perhaps I'm spelling it wrong.
Yeah,
So
but that's the place. Yeah.
that's what it is. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much. Thank you everyone for attending. We have our schedule up on our website, ethanallenhomestead.org, for all of our presentations for 2026, as well as our reenactment programs that will start again in May. And next month in February, we have a presentation by Meg Mott, who is a political theorist. This is one for the civics lessons for Vermonters, although anyone is able to attend, but it's going to be looking at the Vermont state constitution and asking, can we really be free without virtue? It's kind of a leading question. So that one is also on Zoom. Please go to our website to find the link to register. Registration is limited, so act soon if you want to attend that. And please, everyone, check out our YouTube page for this video presentation in a few weeks, but also the backlog of all of our past presentations. We're on YouTube at the channel Ethan Allen Homestead. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a fabulous rest of the day.